You are. Meet my obligation.
We'll figure out, I feel like a Gemini summary or something. Yeah. Just outline.
Yeah. I'll like throw it in and I'll circulate it. It's lovely. The video can be circulated, but I think it can. This will be like always. I'll figure out. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Okay.
Well, okay.
We'll do.
I was unclear about.
We'll figure it out.
I'm
excited.
And tomorrow starts early.
It does.
Okay.
I feel like
Great. Hi, folks. We're going to call us to order now. And what I'd like to do is start by just going around the table and we'll go around the screen and make sure that everybody knows everybody else's name. So I'll ask you to start introducing yourself.
Victoria Pitas, and I sit on the tree board.
Stacy Spain, and I also sit on the tree board.
Mark Hoffman, I work here.
And you, Lloyd, Climate Action Committee.
Sarah Phillips, Climate Action Committee.
Mimi Bertram, Climate Action Committee.
Jan
And
McDaya, Planning Commission.
Alexander Doty with Cascadia Consulting Group.
Maddie Sievert, Cascadia Consulting Group.
And Alexandra, have you?
Yeah, she went.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight in such good spirits for what will be our final meeting of this committee, and as official meetings. The purpose tonight is to review the draft climate element, and first issue is obviously welcome to the meeting. I'd like to move forward with adopting the agenda and then we'll get into other topics. So has everyone had a chance to review the agenda?
Yes.
Does anyone have any changes that they would like to suggest? Agenda changes going once. We'll call for changes twice. Any proposed changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll ask unanimous consent to adopt the agenda. Is there any dissent? Any objection to adopting the agenda? Any objection? The agenda is adopted. We'll go around the room really quickly. What has come up for you since our last meeting? And Victoria, could you lead us off?
Ooh, I'm called on by the teacher. I don't have an answer. Looking forward to tomorrow night when we get to bring this body of work to both of the groups that we sit on and kind of get more eyes on it and feedback from them. So it's what's top of mind for me right now.
I also was caught off guard. That's okay. Mostly enjoying the really lovely weather. Also super concerned with all the sort of the pain points for our national park system. I follow those headlines pretty closely. And I think the superintendent of Crater Lake National Park just resigned. So sad under the duress of like all the staffing shortages. So really sad there. So that's top of mind for me.
The weather, it's a difference maker. The sun pops out and I didn't know that I enjoyed it. But also that to look at the calendar and see June 1st and 2nd is finally here, and in 28 days, 3 major efforts will be in the books, one way or another.
Yeah.
It'll be a good month.
On the equinox.
So I'm really excited about the work that was done up in town center on our climate hub.
Yeah, me too. We had about 100 people come in and paint, and they were, they weren't the usual suspects. I mean, few of the usual suspects, but mostly they were new people. We have a new young woman who was interested in joining the Climate Action Committee, and she came and painted with her friends, and they were like climbed up on scaffolds, and they were fearless, and it was wonderful. I hope you all get a chance to come see. It's not quite finished yet, but it's done enough so that you can see what it is.
Maybe?
So many things.
Of
The hub was great. It was very encouraging to be there with all the excitement and energy around painting. And it's impressive, just from seeing the drawing of it and standing there and imagining what it would look like when it was painted to seeing it painted. It's just impressive to see, stand there and see it's large. Anyway, but the climate element draft was really, it's coming together. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And it's been really, it's been a great experience, so thank you. So that's top of mind. When I first opened it and started reading it, I was like, this is great, this is why they're here. So thank you, guys.
Yanni,
Yeah, I'll just, a slightly different tack, but some of you probably saw the article in the Seattle Times about flooding in South Park, which is very much a climate equity related topic, and just, reading the stats on kind of the income levels and the multitude of languages spoken in South Park, and just the really dramatic and awful impacts that folks in that neighborhood have experienced multiple times, when we've had kind of that confluence of, rain, high tides, low pressure system, things like that. And it just reminds me, even though our city is very different in its setting, it just reminds me about how often, environmental sort of calamities tend to be concentrated on people who can least handle it, and, economically and otherwise. So it's a good article. It's a really pretty interesting, actually, like to really get how all that stuff happened. I mean, I knew about it through my work, but it's a pretty good one. If you haven't read it, it's a nice article.
Alexandra.
Oh, we wrote a climate element. And I would say, yeah, personally, I've been enjoying the sun, doing lots of biking, and the longer days are just such a treat. And honestly, like really throwing off the schedule. It's like so hard to go to bed when it's still light out. But I'm appreciating it, soaking it up. Maddie.
Yeah, same. Excited to be bringing you the climate element tonight. And I was on a really early flight last night, so I also wanted to apologize up front if I'm not at my most eloquent tonight. But still excited to chat it through with you.
Thank you all very much. Our next topic is review and approval of the meeting minutes for May. Do we have a copy of those?
Yeah. Oh, Brendan, no,
Do we have a copy up on the screen?
no, we didn't.
No, okay.
They're,
You,
they're emailed to you in your packet. Hopefully you
yeah,
have them digital.
did,
I have one copy if you wanna peruse them.
well, did anyone have any modifications to the May meeting minutes? Let me ask that. Any suggested revisions to the May meeting minutes?
I think it was Matt Muhlenberg that was our guest. I think it was Josh,
Rosenau maybe?
whatever Josh's last name is. Rosenau.
I have three: Tracy, Matt Muhlenberg, and Josh Rosenthal.
Oh, I see.
But in the
Number-
draft, it only says Matt.
Okay.
If we
I
can,
don't think Matt came, did he?
He was on the screen.
Oh, he was on the screen. That's
Yeah.
right. Of course, okay.
so could minutes be revised to show actual attendance then?
If so directed, yes.
Thank you. Any other? James, I was absent at the meeting, so I'm not going to speak to proposed revisions. But are there any other proposed revisions from those who were present?
Move the meeting, move the agenda with inclusion of people action.
Then I'm going to ask that we approve the minutes with the proposed revision to confirm the attendance. Is there any objection to approving the minutes as revised? Objection to approving the minutes as revised? Objection to approving the minutes as revised? Hearing none, the revised minutes are approved. Thank you very much. And that moves us into
Not me.
the fun part. New business. Alexandra, Maddie, how would you like to present this portion of the meeting? Just take it away, it's your section.
Great. We've got slides.
Okay, Maddie, can you see this? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me just go to. Okay.
Perfect. All right. Well, we're happy to have received some comments from several of you by email already. We're still going to take a little bit of a step back and talk about our process, where we are, what we're looking for immediately, what's next, and we'll give a really quick overview of what's in the climate element, but looking forward to spending most of our time on discussion questions to just hear what really jumped out at you, what's highest priority to address, what surprised you, and anything else that's on your mind. Great, so starting with the process, you can see our yellow star. We're here at the June CPAT meeting. We've gone through a couple of iterations of our policies at this point. They've been through a city review, open house, a previous CPAT meeting. We've brought them here to you tonight, and we've got one more round of revisions before we submit to Commerce on June 13th. But we do have a little bit of a longer road after that, which we'll get to in a couple of slides. So in a little bit more detail, what we've done since we saw you last is we integrated revisions into the policies from a few different sources, from the city staff workshop, some written feedback we received afterwards, the open house, the CPAT meeting, and the emails we received afterwards. We consulted with SCJ too, hoping to learn from their process developing the broader comprehensive plan. And we conducted an equity assessment that's kind of a smaller part of Commerce's requirements, to make sure that policies are not going to exacerbate existing inequities. We had received some of that feedback the last time we saw you, and we were able to present themes, and basically we organized each of those and kind of saw the totality of feedback and made changes as a result. The biggest changes we made were adding a few policies. There are 2 new resilience policies, one around resilience hubs, and one around flood-related education and outreach, and then 1 new greenhouse gas emissions reduction policy, which is incentives for recycling C&D waste. The biggest policy update we're potentially working on right now, it's a hot off the press update. Just as you may remember, our wedge analysis that we presented at the last meeting showed a gap between Lake Forest Park's emission targets and how far the modeled policies would take the city towards meeting those goals, both in 2050 and in the interim. So we chatted with Mark, and Mark asked us to consider what that gap means for the city, whether the targets are truly achievable and what it would take to reach them. We know that basically it would take significant state, regional, and or local action to reach the city's targets beyond what we modeled. We also know that natural gas is a really big source of the remaining emissions once we take into account current local, regional, and state policies. So additional action should ideally target that, but we're a bit limited by Initiative 2066, which was passed last fall, which doesn't allow us to really discourage the use of natural gas in the city. So we want to help the city meet its targets. We're exploring options. We can't say too much for now until we find out a little bit more, have this ongoing conversation with Mark to find out what the city is comfortable with including in the climate element. We wanted to bring this to you as a really quick agenda item tonight, just to alert you that it's possible things might shift in that regard. It's possible we'll add a policy to specifically address natural gas use in existing buildings and residences. We aren't really sure yet, and it might require some more legal counsel from the city's end for ongoing conversations. Was there anything you hoped to add there, Mark?
No, I love it as is,
Okay,
but I know you have 2 documents that you emailed today for Thursday's review. So if that's what you're referring to, vehicle miles traveled, etc., I'll get to those this week.
great. Yeah, I think that is part of the conversation, and we've got some questions for you beyond that as well.
Okay.
Great. Great. Next, a little bit more detail about the equity assessment. This was a required deliverable by Commerce. We wanted to save this until late in the process so that we had policy language that we were pretty confident about to assess. What we did was develop this criteria to score each goal and policy, ranging from low, which is likely to increase existing inequities or injustices and worsen social or economic vulnerability for most or all groups, ranging up to very high score for equity, which means that the action would significantly reduce social and economic vulnerability and advance equity for all communities. And our goal here was to avoid any actions scored at 1, ideally 2, which would mean basically that any actions we're supporting in the climate element are neutral or beneficial to equity across the city. Really aiming to not include any policies that increase existing inequities. So we took a look, there actually weren't any policies scored at a 1, which is great. We did a good first pass there. Our average score for policies was 3.6, so ranging from neutral to beneficial. And we only changed one policy, policy 4.3, which is related to on-site energy storage incentives that had scored at a 2 because of affordability considerations. So we added language to support affordability for a wider range of communities in the city. And just wanted to link this to Yanni's comment at the beginning, reflecting that there are communities that are hit first and worst by climate change impacts. So this equity assessment is to reflect that in the policy language and make sure we're recognizing that.
So, Maddie, did you
Mhm.
take the scoring and look at the policies? Is that what you're saying you did?
Yes.
What framework did you use to do the assessment?
We use the same language that we have been hopefully consistent about throughout the climate element. So,
No, I'm just wondering how you scored it.
oh, sure.
Like what were the sort of standards that you used? I'm just, is it like, was it something you guys do in-house to assess? Or something you've taken from somewhere else that is telling you how to score policies?
Yeah, we have adapted these criteria. I know our equity team, we have equity staff that could tell us a little bit more where these criteria came from. But we worked with them to define these criteria and apply them and double check the results.
No worries, that's cool. I was just curious.
I think we're also building a bit on the commerce guidance for equity co-benefits, but it's a bit of both, I think, Stacy.
Awesome.
You kind of asked me if there's a rubric
Yeah,
that goes with this.
that was my
With-
question.
with, You know, a little chart says.
Yeah.
This is, and then you get very low, very low. This is-
I used the word framework,
Right.
but
I think you need like a rubric.
I think I might use rubric, yeah.
Yeah, basically, yeah, applying these scores and criteria based on our climate team and our equity team's expertise.
Absolutely makes sense.
Great. So that is where we've been. Where we're going from here is a couple more rounds of this draft. So we're not at the end of our road yet. We have one round of review that we're working on before submitting this draft to Commerce and to the public for the public comment period. So in the meantime, we're responding to any final comments from the city. There's an ongoing conversation about the wedge, as we just mentioned, and about adjusting stormwater policies with Chris Corwell. So a few open questions. Then we're looking at our public comment period where it'll be available for the broader public. We welcome comments from this group, the group's meeting tomorrow, any others. We'd love for this to be broadcast far and wide across the city. And then later this year, the dates are still to be determined, but we'll be bringing this to Planning Commission in the summer and City Council later on. The public comment period, what that's going to look like, we're targeting June 16th, so that's coming up pretty quickly. through mid-August, so a good long window for folks to respond. We're using the platform Conveo, which is a favorite of ours. It embeds the PDF right into a website, and by clicking on the document, you can leave a comment. So there's no need to sign in. You can if you like, if you'd like us to know who's leaving the comments and be able to track your own comments through the document, but anybody can participate. We like this option because it really lowers the barriers to participate, and so that community members can be in conversation with each other, so you can see what other people have already said about the document. Let that spur your own opinions. And it makes it really easy for us to download every single comment and know what it's referring to on the back end. So we have a really organized system of looking at all of the comments and proposing changes. Great. So that'll be available June 16th, and we will make sure that all of you have that link and the specific dates. What that brings us to tonight is capturing any of your key critical feedback and questions. We have a bit of time the next couple of weeks to address any comments for the broad public review draft and for commerce. And we'll do our best to incorporate all comments by that date. Tonight, we're also hoping to seek your support to advance the climate element to commerce in your capacity as an advisory body. And we are hoping to just look through the next steps. We're preparing the draft for public comments, submittal to Commerce, and Planning Commission review, which are our immediate next steps. Couple things to keep in mind. We appreciate your patience in not sharing this draft widely yet. So this current round of review for the last week or so has just been really city staff, CPAT, Deputy Mayor Furutani, who's been involved since the beginning. A few of you have already pointed out a few small inconsistencies through the draft. We'll make sure to fix those in the next round. Want this to look really good before prime time going out to the public. So we'll run that through our graphics team, make sure the format, photos, icons all look great. We'll make sure it's accessible to screen readers. We'll finalize any numbers as needed and do a final check on those, and a final editorial board review for spelling and syntax. Just all the bells and whistles, making sure that's good to go. All right, so what you have seen in the last week is this document, this lovely table of contents. We did our best to really mirror the adopted comprehensive plan. So we split out the document into volume 1 and volume 2, where volume 1 is really just the goals and policies. And then volume 2 provides that high level analysis, just those key details that underpin the policies. You'll notice that not every intermediate deliverable that we've provided is really fully reflected there. We wanted it to be understandable without a lot of context, without overwhelming with a lot of technical details, knowing that we will want to make those technical memos available for people that search for them. And we're working with Mark to understand exactly what that looks like.
Yeah, and I can just share a brief update on that, Maddie. Mark and I met this morning and talked through how we'll be providing those technical documents. I think the plan is, and Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but we'll be making all those memos available on the Lake Forest Park website. And then we'll add a section in our next version of the climate element that speaks to and references these are the technical memos that were created through the climate element process. Any edits there, Mark?
Not at all. Adopted by reference without making it so confusing nobody reads the document.
There are a lot of juicy VMT details in there, but we wanted it to be easy to follow. All right, and then in that background analysis section, there are 4 main chapters. First, we go through the planning context, which is a summary of the documents that we reviewed for the policy audit, with particular attention given to the Climate Action Plan and the 100-year legacy vision, for 2 that really were a strong foundation to lean on for the climate element policies. public participation. This was such a key and extensive part of the climate element development. We were so excited that we had such great survey engagement. We got to speak to a couple of community groups. This group provided incredible detailed input. So emphasizing that in the element. And then our real kind of analysis results, starting with the resilience pieces, a summary of climate impacts facing the city, vulnerable communities generally, and the assets that we assessed vulnerability for across our 4 sectors. So really coming from the climate impact summary and the vulnerability assessment. And then regarding greenhouse gas emissions, summarizing the greenhouse gas inventory, the VMT analysis, and parts of the wedge analysis, mostly those key state and regional and federal policies that are going to help Lake Forest Park achieve its targets. Great. Any questions or comments before we head into our discussion?
See anything about the survey result in this document? Did I miss it?
No, we didn't really summarize the engagement results and the public participation. And I noted that comment by email that somebody submitted. So we can, I think that can be a powerful part of planning. Documents is noting the key themes that we heard across engagement. I see you unmuted, Alexandra.
Yes, I will say, I think we would look to you and the city to kind of guide what level of detail we provide. We did our best to match the level of detail around public participation that was provided in the broader comp plan. And so that's why we went to the level of detail that we did. But if we need or want to include more, we can. As a project team, just for a process note, we are planning to provide the city an engagement summary as a deliverable in the summer that incorporates a summary of our survey, our open house, the group interviews, and the public comment period. So we'll synthesize, we've been synthesizing those results and relying on them for the policy development, but we'll speak more, we'll have that engagement summary as a deliverable to the city later this summer. Did that answer your question, Sarah? Or do you think that we should include more context around the survey results in the comp plan itself?
I felt like we didn't really sort of delve into those results, and it would be helpful to be able to see them, and maybe they'll be on the website. You can look at it there. So.
Is you're gonna provide a summary, but will we ever have access to like a list of all comments that anybody ever made? If we felt like taking a look, the details, is that gonna be available?
Good question. So we did send to the CPAT the survey summary without the like open-ended responses. I'll look to you, Mark, through the virtual space here. We were thinking that a lot of the open-ended responses do include like some identifiable information. So if we share that or make that available, there's some potential that the anonymity of those respondents would be jeopardized. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I have it on the spectrum as a June, July thing to inform CPAT, tree board, CAC, planning commission, and a website tool. It doesn't need to be primary in the comprehensive plan document. None of our surveys are. Doesn't mean it can't be spoken to, but as a resource, it's in the library on the website.
Okay.
Confusion, but that's different than this format question. As far as when it exists and who we get it to, everybody. So more than the hint that you got 2 weeks ago, which to me means everything but the names. I don't care who made the comment, so anonymity, sure, but the comment's very important.
Great.
But I think she was saying that there are details in the comments themselves that could reveal the identity of some of the people who are commenting. They must like imply their address or something like that, right?
Wow.
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for someone with more context than myself, like I might be able to read between the lines. So, but I think, Mark, what I'm hearing you say is because we don't have names of those respondents, it's okay to share the open-ended responses.
I don't know what they are, so redact whatever you don't want to show.
Okay. Okay, great.
So it's like a review for
Yeah, for-
anonymity would
Yeah.
be good
exactly.
before sharing anything.
Yeah,
We can make that work.
yeah, okay. But in a couple of weeks after we go to commerce, this is not a,
It's not an
Yeah.
urgent matter.
yeah, it's not a draft
It's not
element.
time
It's-
critical.
But for adoption and evaluating, absolutely.
Well, we want to know. In order to get community buy-in and acceptance and actually be able to move things forward, we have to know where the rubs. Where is this rubbing wrong? Where are we meeting resistance before people even explore it further? So that information will be very helpful to us as we look to implement recommendations within our community. If we can accommodate objections and revise our proposals so that these are addressed, that will be a step forward. So we want to be able to listen, hear, and iterate through.
Would the public comment period allow that?
In a different way, yeah,
Yeah, it's, hopefully things will keep improving.
Yeah,
yeah,
Hopefully as we go through the process.
yeah.
specific words.
Yeah.
In, with the format that they plan on using, as opposed to just general responses to questions.
Right.
Yeah, the survey asked generally about policy areas. We asked about specific policies at the open house, but didn't receive a lot of critical feedback. So this would be our opportunity to hear real wording changes or specific policies rubbing people the wrong way. But I like that point about understanding how to communicate and implement the policies and really pulling those takeaways out. So flagging that in our notes for the engagement summary that we're developing.
One comment, Maddie, are you just taking?
Yeah, general comments.
Okay.
Really-
Go ahead.
Oh, on the next slide, we can get to kind of our discussion questions. Oh, yeah, they're already up. So I was thinking first we would focus on the policies, since that's, I think, very critical content. We have revised them, want to open up and see if there are questions or concerns about the policies first, especially any red flags that you definitely want us to focus on and change before planning commission that might warrant discussion with this group. And then just opening up to the full draft. I know the summarized content shows up in a little bit of a different way than the takeaways that we previously presented to this group. So curious if any of the content was surprising, and if the document flowed and presented information in a way that's useful and easy to understand, and if not, what isn't clear and what questions you have. But if there are general kind of clarifying questions or process questions, we'll definitely field those first.
What question are you asking us? Are you asking us about the policies?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't clear. I was reviewing our discussion questions and then saying first, since we did just go over the policy or the process that we're following, if there are any process questions or overall questions before we dive in, now's a good time.
Stacy, did you have a question or comment?
Mine is about one of the policies.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yes, same.
Okay, perfect segue. Let's get into the policies.
Do you want to go one by one or do you want me to just jump in? Because mine is on 8. Goal CE 8.
Yeah, I think we'll follow where the energy is. I would love, yeah, I'm particularly interested in any comments or questions you've got about the changes that we made, but we are open to any of it. And I think we can jump around based on what's most important to this group. So let's start with 8.
I think it's pretty simple. The goal is CE-8, efficient transit-oriented development. Did you guys purposefully not use the word public transit? Because when I read that, I feel like it's conflicting with the prior goal CE6, which is alternatives to driving. So I'm like, oh, you're sort of like pushing for transit oriented development, but maybe we should just clarify that with public transit oriented development. And then I noticed you didn't actually use it at all, and then it seemed very purposeful. So I'm just wondering if there was a reason for it.
No, I think transit-oriented development is the typical name of the concept that we see, but it does refer to public transit.
So great. And sorry, Stacy, which was the second one? It was goal CE. Can you say your two goals
Yeah.
again, or the two policy
Well,
numbers?
it's just, I don't have any changes that I would make to goal CE6, but I would say that when I read goal CE8, seems to go against goal CE6 if you don't use the word public transit oriented development and then use public throughout, because you seem to imply that you're trying to promote transit oriented development, which goes against goal CE6, which is alternatives to driving. Maybe not. Just the way I'm reading it. Transit to me can be, anyway, just my comment, take it or leave it.
Are you thinking that driving falls into the transit umbrella and that's where it's confusing?
Perhaps, right? I think of transit and I think of transportation.
Okay.
Right.
Isn't 8 more about development of housing than it is about transportation? That. Because the policy, I did have a comment about 8.3. But
Yeah.
that was how I read it.
Got it. Okay,
Is
got
that-
it. Yep,
Is
yep.
that-
No,
I
it
wonder-
totally makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could provide a definition in that area. Transit-oriented development is defined by the FTA as compact mixed-use communities near public transit where people enjoy easy access to jobs and services. But we can definitely clarify that.
All good.
Maybe it's just one of those little definitions. that
Yeah.
Yeah.
they can-
Exactly. It's all only, yeah, just an interpretation.
Well, if this group has that question, other people reading absolutely will. So thank you for raising it.
There were a couple of times where the concept of a glossary seemed useful.
We have a glossary now. It's incorporated into the overall comprehensive plan, so any of these terms
So,
can be deposited there.
or you may pull from the existing comp plan for some of the terms that are being used here. I mean, I think one of the challenges is whenever you're working in a profession, you get used to language and it means what it means to you.
Yeah.
And then somebody who's never read any of your reports walks in and goes, what do you mean underserved? What do you mean vulnerable? And it's really helpful if you have a guide into that right from the start. I mean, I've found it helpful in my reports because strangely, nobody understands the word potentiometric. Or
That's odd.
betas, you know, they just look at me like, what are you talking about? So, yeah, I think even though a lot of your language is actually common English, your exact usage is different and specialized. And so being able to convey those specialized uses as applied in these documents is probably helpful, and probably most of it already exists in the comp plan. It'll be just a couple extra words that you'll pull in, but it'll be just again, easing the transition for a new reader of these documents.
Thanks.
Can I
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It asks about policy 8.3. Maybe it's from Mark.
Oh, man,
It says reducing parking minimums
yeah,
near transit oriented development.
it just happened to us 2 weeks ago.
But there's no mention of requiring parking in the buildings that are built. Right, if you're gonna build a new building. And you want those people to be able to park, why would you want them to park on the street versus in the building?
Those are captured in development regulations as we apply them to a site. This is the policy level. And I would have said 2 weeks ago, this was an encouraged policy. It's not mandated by the new bill the governor signed.
Could you explain what that actually means?
Let's say this is a high level policy that captures an issue. Then you have implementation items, then we adopt development codes, and there could be 40 codes, but they're supported by this one policy.
So I mean, in this case, it's if you build, it's about building, right? Building
Yeah.
new transit oriented to housing is
It's,
undercharged.
it's about not requiring too much parking in some people's minds.
So not required. to
Exactly.
pursue. It's
Get out of the car, take mass transit, walk, bike. The theory is if you have a policy that requires full parking mandates, and then you have an implementation task that says update your parking manual. Then you have a development regulation that says you shall have 4 spaces per unit. It's too much asphalt, too much car, too much reliance on single occupant vehicle. And so this policy sets it, then we can no longer mandate that amount of parking.
so that means they can build housing with no parking.
Yes, yeah.
And then everyone has to park on the street.
In theory,
But no one, but, or they're saying you shouldn't buy a car.
yeah,
I
Right.
understand that
encouraging
motivation.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about what is actually happening out there. which is
Yeah.
People are parking up neighborhoods.
Well, every city's different. This
Yeah.
city does not have curb, gutter, sidewalk, and a lot of on-street parking,
Yeah.
but we're primarily low-density residential. There's not gonna be much change, but Southern Gateway, if you take advantage of the existing FTEs and this new bill, it's saying the city cannot mandate large-scale parking anymore. Thereby encouraging people to use transit. Now, the developer will develop parking because people won't buy.
Don't buy it.
Yeah.
But how
this is
much?
That's
can't
how it's
mandate it.
supposed to balance, that's how it's supposed to
Yeah, so,
somehow find a happy medium.
well, and what happens is
According to Olivia, yeah.
in some cases, developers will charge extra for apartments that come with parking. Or parking is something that you buy additional, and people who do not need or want parking do not have to pay for the construction of a parking garage that they neither ask for nor will ever use.
Yes, it's a complicated.
It's
But right now, you can't get to that scenario because our codes and our policy says you shall provide this much parking and the story. And this is taking that policy down to where they don't have to. They can, but they don't have to.
So are we learning from Shoreline? Am I
No, we're
thinking?
learning from the 4-county metro Seattle area. Cause we're first, so Kitsap, Snohomish, King and Pierce. With our comp plan in 6 months, we're the first. I don't want experiment, yeah. And that policy sets that tone so that people have that option. Maybe you don't need to buy a car. And then you could have more housing affordability near where you work, near the 3 types of transit station. That's the idea. And so for Lake Forest Park, primarily residential, not much change, no curb, gutter, sidewalk. They just have the same parking ratios. But where the future BRT stations are, a 1/4-mile radius, and this policy is now mandated. I was saying it's coming, it's more or less here. 2 weeks.
I know we've been giving this one space since it came up in the written comments too. So now this is a question in folks' minds. Since it sounds on its face like there could be a strong overlap with existing codes. So just checking with Mark and the group to see if this still feels good as a policy level item here, or if it feels redundant.
I liked having it in there because it accommodates the new mandated policies. It at least keeps us pointed in the right direction and it doesn't leave it unstated. I prefer the transparency of at least addressing the topic, bringing it up and having it here in black and white. And not leaving it to, oh, did you hear that there's a new? You know, the governor just signed something 2 weeks ago. Oh, you didn't know? Wow, you're out of the loop. I like having it in black and white.
Now, in November, December, when council acts on this at the policy level, then it applies to the city of Lake Forest Park. Everything else will be amended to accommodate that. When we send it to Commerce for their 60-day review, this has to be in there.
Yeah.
At that point. And I think it's general enough that it works. So if a comment is, well, on 35th or 28th, that's crazy. There's no on-street parking and it's 40% slope. Exactly. That's not where it's going to be applied. But essentially 522 in town center. That corridor. They grabbed Lake Forest Park.
So
Well,
I
if
get
I
all,
can I just chime in real quick from the screen here? And I mean no disrespect here. I think this is a really important thing, but I don't feel like this committee's time is best used wrestling with trying to think through the implications of parking requirements or policy, even though I understand there is a nexus to some of the climate work, but really this is for the planning commission, it's for city staff and code and for the council. And I just don't know that it's the best use of our time to trying to drill into parking right now. So again, I mean, no disrespect with that. I just don't think that that's where we should be spending our time with our consultants.
Thank you, Yanni, but I believe the question came up and it has been answered, and I think we were about to move on to the next topic.
Perfect.
So since we're in section 8, I had another question in policy CE8. Did anyone else have CE8 questions, or I'll lead with mine?
I have another one, but
Yeah,
I'll go after you.
Go right ahead.
So mine is connected to the last conversation, but not diving into the like merits of things. I believe CE 6.4 was adapted after a similar comment I made last time, that it felt like it was previously targeting making transit easier for specifically underserved populations. And I recommended like, okay, but the folks who can't afford to drive aren't the ones you have to convince to take the bus. I am. I have a similar question about the one we were just talking about, 8.3. I have no issue with 8.3 itself, but I'm curious if there's something else missing, that this may be too big of a question to address, that again, convincing someone living in an apartment that they can't afford to park their car at their apartment is not necessarily the like priority in my opinion, but convincing me with a single family home, 3 parking spaces, a garage and 3 cars, that I don't need that, feels like something that we should be working towards.
But I don't see
but I
how
don't.
that ties into this.
So my question is there something missing that is not addressed through what's currently here, that is about convincing the rest of the city that's not in that southern gateway to change our habits and construction and usage and everything else around vehicle transit? Again, big question. I don't have an easy solve of like, you should change this word here, but it feels like a missing part. It feels like, again, targeting things at marginalized populations and ignoring
That's so true.
the people that you actually have to convince to change, or maybe
So,
harder.
For example, I'm just going to try to pull this through so that we understand where we're going. A policy that would identify parking minimums outside the transit-oriented development bubbles.
I don't necessarily think it's a parking minimums thing, but the parking minimums parking minimums is what made me think, parking minimums is a solution in this one part of the city, but what is the comparable thing that we want to potentially be working towards for the whole rest of the city?
So
Is there some other?
You want people to have only 2-car garage.
I mean,
Or kind of where you're going.
Or have to
I'm
pay
not-
additional
I'm
Yeah.
just saying, what's the goal?
I mean, it could be additional license fees for having like more than 2 cars.
Okay, so I'm gonna suggest this starts getting into some policy discussions that are actually outside of this. For a couple of reasons. The first is that gets into other parts of the code. And constraints. This is focusing on efficient transit oriented development, and that is focusing on
Yeah.
everything outside.
Yeah.
And I think that it starts moving into other aspects of the code that we could consider at some point, but I don't see it fitting in this discussion right now, if that's okay.
I think that's fair.
Thank you.
Well, I think it answers your question, which is nothing's really missing from that section, but maybe something's missing from another part.
Well,
Yeah.
the alternatives to driving.
Yeah, the alternatives. to
Yeah, it
driving,
kind of, yeah. 8 is what made me think of it. Maybe it fits better in 6 or somewhere else completely else, but I don't know, it felt like.
Well,
I
we
guess
were-
the hope is we organically arrive at the same, why do I have a 3-car garage, right? I'm not using it, but how do you get there?
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
I'll tell you, based on my personal experience in New Hampshire, the reason you have the 3-car garage is because 2 of the people in the complex leave their car stored over at your place and pay you $100 a month rent to rent your garage space.
That is what
And,
happens,
yeah,
that is. what
so,
happens.
but I do think it's outside of what we're trying to accomplish here, because we're getting into telling people how to live their lives as opposed to what's our policy around transit oriented developments. And I'd like, so I'm gonna selfishly move on to policy CE 8.4, which is where we say we should support developments that use clean energy or reduced energy consumption. And ask what you mean by clean energy, and how this would happen if we're not allowed to say, hey, please don't use natural gas. Cause nobody's putting in big heating oil burners, we're not seeing that, so the question is, and nobody's going to put in their own small modular nuclear reactor in order to power their facility.
Never know.
So when we're talking about clean energy in a city which is mostly powered by Seattle City Light. And the choices are Seattle City Light electricity, or natural gas. Those are really the 2 choices we're talking about. What are we actually trying to say here? And are we not uttering fossil fuels or natural gas for a specific reason?
One of them.
Yes, Initiative 2066.
We'll see where we're at next year.
Yeah. Does that make sense to you, Anne? That we cannot legally discourage natural gas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think as a policy, it cannot come from a government position. Yeah, it may be that there are advertising, there are always groups and communities that educate. And provide background reasons why a developer may or may not go in a certain direction. But we can't legislate through this policy until that initiative is resolved. So. Okay,
We're allowed to support renewable energy, electricity, but we're not allowed to disincentivize natural gas. So a weird kind of fine line that hasn't quite been legally tested. So we're going by commerce guidance and tiptoeing around it a little bit.
And that's the middle ground, but and like you said, it depends on the reader and what they read all the time. When I read that, I don't read coal.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So and so that readability, does this become a glossary term?
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
I would like to take a slightly different approach going forward here, since I'm chairing this meeting and I feel like it could get very confusing otherwise. I'd like to be able to move through the document in a slightly more structured manner, so that we at least get portions discussed and we know what we have remaining. So I'd like to ask if anyone has any comments to section CE-1, smoke and heat resilience. Were there any concerns regarding those policies?
This is I did.
Yeah.
This was the first time I came across the issues. I'm very uncomfortable with the climate equity language. And this was the first place. I mean, I got the sense that there were sort of these poor people over here and we have to take care of them because they're poor. And I don't know that that's really what we wanted to say. So that in policy CE 1.3, we say, We want to expand access to cooling and clean air resources, wildfires, especially for low-income households, older adults, and people with disabilities or respiratory conditions. And I don't know why, I'm an old person. I don't know that. It just didn't, it had a exclusionary quality that I think is throughout the document. I found there were places where I thought, wow. And maybe it was a place where I really liked it, and there was a description where we talked about, in the other section, community vulnerability to climate change. I thought captured it better, but it made me unsettled. But I don't know how to talk about it, but I kept running into thinking, I'm not sure that captures really what we want to have happen when we're looking at people who need additional assistance.
Sarah, do you think it would read better if you just completely eliminated the last part of that sentence in CE 1.3?
Maybe.
So where you're not calling out low income households, older adults, people with disabilities, and those with respiratory conditions. Essentially, you just read the first line and then end it before the dash.
You could say expand access so everyone has access.
Yeah, it feels
Yes.
more inclusive.
More
less
inclusive as
exclusionary.
opposed to identifying those who've been excluded.
Just, this is not a statement about what the word should say.
Yeah.
We went through that all last year with the planning commission for the overall comprehensive plan. And ran into that over and over, equity, et cetera. Environmental justice is a key element of not only our grant, but the language used in Olympia, the language used in King County, and the language that we have to use to some extent as a community. So it's not solely to capture the flavor or the semantics of the one community, but to some extent, we have to match the environmental justice portions of this climate element, and the grant funding requires that. I believe it's not just the Climate Commitment Act, but it's the HEART Act. And that trickles down
Heal.
to cities.
Well, I do understand that because we ran this through with the climate action plan. But I think that what we don't want to do is we want to create inclusionary language. That's all.
So is there a specific reason that it has to list the
Yeah.
exact demographics instead of just being expand equitable access to these things?
Yeah.
Like putting the word equitable earlier instead of listing all of the people you're
does
trying to
depending-
target with equity?
Yeah,
Depending on
But-
who is the reviewer.
Okay,
yeah.
So
Okay.
when you're at K4C or with Cascadia or this community, that's a different take. When you are trying to get certified at Puget Sound Regional Council or apply for a grant, if you don't have those terms called out, you're not competitive.
okay,
Or you won't be certified, or they won't give you the reimbursement on the grant, or et cetera. So whatever tie-in we have to the state, the county, and these partnerships and agencies, that's why those call outs are there.
I can't think of any way to rewrite this to put that clause in a different order or a different position that would allow us to include even most of that language without it being even more awkward. I'm looking at this and going, yeah, it's about what you can do and get the words in there.
Maybe
Just to clarify quickly, those groups are called out because they are often more vulnerable to heat impacts. So in some cases, it's about access. In some cases, it's about pre-existing conditions that make people more vulnerable to heat. We could say vulnerable groups. It's a little bit less specific and a little bit less tied to the goal of this policy.
Well, I'm gonna be asking you to define vulnerable groups in other areas anyways. The specificity actually helps me. And, you know, I'll apologize, Sarah, but my parents grew up in, terribly, there was no air conditioning through most of their lives, and so the idea that they needed to cool during hot weather was kind of foreign to their mindset. They just assumed they didn't ever need air conditioning until actually, it turned out at a certain point, they really did. And it was very hard to, it took some convincing. It took some real convincing. So the vulnerability was just habit. You know, a lifetime habit of never doing it. So
I'm just raising it. I don't need to feel the need to defend it. I'm expressing my.
Yanni?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Mark was saying, and since the work of this group is being fed straight to the planning commission, while I fully, hear and respect some of the concerns around the language that can come across as awkward or forced, and as Mark said, we talked about it a great deal. The planning commission and the draft that we produced of the comp plan, retain this type of language, and we're going to need to have it be consistent. So I would just say that, let's leave it. I get that it sounds, it can sound a little awkward, especially in certain circumstances, and in others it sounds fine, but we're going to need to have it be consistent. And we've already made that call in the comprehensive plan. And we've explicitly shared with council that we made that call in the comprehensive plan. When we delivered our comp plan to council, we highlighted that this was an issue that we wrestled with, and we explained where we landed, which is to basically leave this type of language as proposed here by the team into the document. So just from the perspective of where this is going next, if we want to pull that language now, we're going to be putting it back in at the planning commission.
Thank you. Is there any other comment to goal CE1, any of the policies? Any other comment to goal CE1? Hearing none, we'll move to environmental justice, goal CE2. And I really do like the way, I want to compliment you if we look at page 4, twice you've taken jargon terms and defined them in the text so that they're clearly shown. And this may be part of what you end up pulling forward into a glossary, so it's all in one place and people don't go, it's in both places, possibly redundant, but possibly useful that way. Any discussions for goal CE2, environmental justice?
I have a couple questions.
Yes, Mimi.
For 2.2, what does it support equitable monitoring of urban forest reduce climate impacts mean? I couldn't create meaning out of that. Oh, Tracy says too. I don't know if it just needs a different wording or if I'm dense, but if you could clarify that.
Yeah, definitely looks like that needs some clarification. With Alexandra sharing screen, we heard that from Deputy Mayor Furtani as well. I think it is slightly awkward phrasing there. Just reflecting the role of trees to reduce heat islands, which is definitely a question of equity, since those appear in some areas of the city and not others.
So would this help maintain trees in areas where they're building, where buildings are being put up, or in development areas?
I think the goal is to understand heat islands a little bit better, understand where there are trees that are particularly worth retaining through a heat lens.
Okay. Yeah, you can just make it clearer, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Thanks.
Any other comments to goal CE2?
I do. Yeah, anything else?
Go ahead, Mimi.
In 2.3, I think it had provided in forest conservation strategies, are these different from protection of natural areas and ecosystems? It says while also prioritizing protection, but I think of those as similar or the same. But I may not think some differences, so somebody could correct me.
Yeah, they definitely overlap. I think the focus here is on the partnership aspect and engagement aspect.
And then we get to the word equitable in 2.4, and I apologize for bringing this up again, but I don't. Word equitable is not my issue, it's just understanding what an equitable opportunity is and what equitable emissions are. To me, it doesn't, I don't know what to think that means and what in practice that represents, so those are my questions.
Yeah, yeah, we can clarify that language. I think we do cover it a bit in that first clause, especially vulnerable populations. So we could get a little bit less repetitive there by potentially taking out that equitable opportunity. And we can clarify what equitable emissions reduction strategies means.
Yeah, for everyone to have opportunities for this, including, what you've already defined.
Have we heard all our comments on goal CE2? We're going to move to goal CE3, drought and flood resilience. And I'll start by asking our teammates, any of the policies in goal CE3 that you wanted to discuss in more detail? I had a couple that are, for instance, in policy CE 3.6. You're discussing wells, reservoirs, and treatment facilities in flood prone areas. For our water supplies, do you know of any treatment facilities that are in flood prone areas? I mean, is this an issue for Lake Forest Park? Because it's like, which of these are actually issues for Lake Forest Park water providers? We have like 5 of them. So
Yeah,
we don't even have treatment facilities for some of our water supplies.
let me double check that map. I know we did bring in the vulnerability assessment results into the policies. I don't.
I would like you to check this for what's applicable, whether as if there are specific examples that are applicable, we may need to at least reference which ones these are. Because when I was looking at this, it's like, well, you know, if we're planning and implementing resilience measures for critical water infrastructure for our community, and I can't even tell you which water providers those might be, and this is an area that I have some familiarity with, then others will also be confused as to who that we might be talking about.
Yeah, I believe the CVA included the 4 North City Water District, North Shore Utility District, Lake Forest Park Water District, and Seattle Public Utilities. So I think those include wells and reservoirs, but we'll confirm if treatment facilities are actually within the boundaries.
The wells for Lake Forest Park, we've got 2 well fields. The reservoir's up at Horizon View Park, that's not a flood zone. Seattle Public Utilities Reservoir is not in the flood zone, it's also up at Horizon View, the one that feeds down. North City's up, the reservoirs are up on top of a hill, not in flood zone. So I mean, I'm trying to be specific here because we're recommending policies to defend against things that may not be applicable to us. If they are applicable to us, then we need a little more specificity.
Yeah, it looks like the main water infrastructure vulnerability in a floodplain was stormwater mains.
Stormwater mains,
Mhm.
but you know, we're and worth calling out separately. Absolutely. There's also some distribution piping that is sensitive. But much of the rest of this, so you know, if we're applying it to our community in specific, it's helpful to have the language reflect what can possibly happen in our. And this seems very broad in a way that is inappropriately broad, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll see if we can add specificity there.
Thanks, Anne. And I'll just note that we weren't given the location of any of the wells or reservoirs from the water district. So in our analysis, that might have been a gap, but that was a security risk. So I think you're seeing some of that come through.
They're literally on so I appreciate that, but they can't get away from putting them on the King County GIS map, so. I walk by them when I go for walks, so. Anyway, appreciate that, and be happy to help with that as is useful. Policy CE 3.9, we had another one of those underserved areas comments. Prioritizing support for communities in flood prone and underserved areas. Again, focusing on Lake Forest Park, which communities would those be? I know we have a couple of flood prone areas and we know most of those, including our groundwater flooding areas, but which underserved areas? Is that a word we need to have here because of some other reason? Or is there actually an underserved area that we could identify and do something about? And that's a serious question. Is there an underserved area that we need to know about and try to make policies to address?
Yeah.
Do you want me
Oh.
to speak to the engagement summary, Maddie? Or the
Yeah.
engagement strategy, excuse me. Yeah. So briefly, and we did at the beginning of the project conduct a social vulnerability assessment that was included in the engagement plan. And to Mark's point earlier, we're relying on that Washington Health Disparities Act, doing our best to be in alignment with the HEAL Act for considering both vulnerable populations and underserved areas. So in that document, we highlight a number of maps from the health disparities map that rank a number of environmental health concerns throughout the city. They are not, so that's my 2 cents. They're not at a very fine data, like they're, I think, zip code based, so.
Nor would they be.
Limitations. Yeah.
So at the policy level, it's primarily compliance with what we're mandated now.
Okay, and so there are
And
zip
it's like an
codes that,
umbrella, then you have an issue arise, then you do the analysis and study. And the findings of that analysis and study spit out what is equitable, what is understood. So if it's trees, we have 3 or 4 of those already. If it's critical areas, if it's shoreline. So most of what this policy would support has not happened. Issues arise, they inform the budget, this policy is on this far end. So it's that spectrum. And bringing
That's a
it
good-
forward and saying underserved should not apply. It precludes any of those studies from actually looking at it and concluding that. Because the policy doesn't support it.
It's a good flag for terminology consistency though, because the environmental health disparities maps typically say overburdened rather than underserved, which reflects overlapping environmental and health burdens rather than a level of service, which here is a bit unclear. So we can.
And this is climate focused, so I get that, but and readability is important. But let's take library books, right? An issue pops up, you do that research and that analysis. And the policy is not the research. And it's a weird example, but what is defined by library book accessibility and underserved in relation to that issue? That's that it comes later. It's a different effort.
At the same time, though, we did do the climate vulnerability assessment, and I definitely want to make sure that as detailed implementation information as we have is reflected at least in the policy rationale that we'll provide to the city and in an implementation plan, if not the policy language. So we'll do that crosswalk too and see if there are more details that might not make it into the policy that we can still connect the dots on.
thank you. Any other comments on CE3? CE3 going twice. Moving on from CE3 to CE4, emergency management. Nice section. I'm just gonna share right at the start, this was another place where vulnerable populations pops up as a term. And it had been predefined in goal CE2. But I'm envisioning a person reading through this document and just going to a policy and not starting at the front and reading to the back. And that's where the concept of having a glossary and maybe having a special font for keywords that you can find in the glossary. So if a person stumbles upon that keyword, they realize that they can find it in the glossary and they can find out what the definition means, and the definition should be consistent across all these policies. Maybe a way to handle it so that you don't have people going, what does vulnerable population mean here? If they didn't start at the beginning and find that. So it's that's a formatting issue, a style issue. But obviously we'll go with whatever you decide, but that was the first time I realized, yeah, this could be an issue that pops up again and again.
Yeah, I love that. I think we might defer to consistency with the rest of the comp plan, so we'll confirm with the city on that. But I like that idea.
So goal CE4, anything that's not a formatting, because I throw that into the formatting, tech editing realm. Are there any further comments on CE4? Comments on CE4? Comments on CE4? We'll move on to CE5. Buildings and energy. Comments on CE5?
Question. In 5.1. I wonder why we can't say adopt a standard instead of encourage adoption standard. Is there a reason?
Oh, I
We
think
allow- They adopt?
I think the city could adopt it for city facilities, and otherwise for non-city buildings, it would be encouraged.
And the mealy word,
It's sort of adopt the standard, but I mean, that's, the
Well,
standard is just whatever you make it, right?
This is for public buildings. 5.1 is specifically for.
now,
So,
the primary purpose of the mealy word before encourage is because this is comprehensive plan. This is optimistic, this perspective, then you get to implementation items.
That's
not
what we adopt.
strong, right? That's the only thing I could think of, but
okay,
usually at the policy level, it's encourage, support.
But a standard is so broad, I mean, this. It could be minimal, or it could be, I mean, it's already sort of mealing out just a standard.
For the level of this document, it actually would make more sense to me to take out the A and put an S at the end of standard,
Adopt standards.
Yes.
because
Standards.
adopt a standard is an action, not a guiding principle.
Standards.
So encouraging adoption
Yeah.
of standards to me says we have to ongoing be thinking about what those standards should be and continuing
that.
to refine them.
yeah, I think your feedback on that suggestion. Revision from encourage adoption of a standard to encourage adoption of standards.
I like it. I think that opens up the option of multiple overlapping standards or different standards for different types of buildings.
Other comments on CE5?
Well, I had a question on this whole greenhouse gas reduction emissions sub-element. And this is where the solution is embedded to So I think it should be before all the, is there some reason it's second to the resilience sub element? And isn't this what we wanna reduce emissions? So these two, so these,
Oh,
Way to go.
it's just
I'm just saying that, I don't need to have a discussion about it, I'm just raising it as a. You know, when we say what we wanna have
I
happen.
mean, why is it CE5, not CE1?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I don't know that there's any rhyme or reason for the order of these goals. Okay.
Well, I think there's a case to be made that reducing emissions is. Front, yeah.
is there any, yeah, so we'll take that as a format question. Is there a specific order in which these policies are being presented that matches some guidance that you're following?
No. There is not. It is simply the order we chose.
So if our top priority is reducing emissions, and we want that to be section 1. Because that's our top priority.
That's an option for sure.
Well, the climate team wants that. But we realize there are other people in the room.
Well, I think that, yeah, I think the real difference would be to put the entire greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element
Yes.
first and the resilience sub-element second.
It's not to die for,
It's-
it's a.
If that can be done relatively easily without your technical editor hunting you down at night. Because as Sarah said, it's not to die for, but it would impress upon people, these are our priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So that is good, big formatting issue. Anyone else in CE5? I do have one small. Then I'll bring mine forward in CE 5.5. In the final sentence, we're educating residents about incentives for emerging clean energy technologies such as tax exemptions. And then we're also and increase resident awareness of existing solar arrays and water heating systems in the city. Again, we're Seattle City Light. So solar arrays are cutting our bills, not our carbon emissions. For all intents and purposes. But what does cut our carbon emissions are heat pumps. So, but that's also household heating and cooling systems and water heating systems.
Mm-hmm.
And things like heat pump clothes dryers. So if we're emphasizing something that is actually going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, which is where this is seated, then it seems like those elements of focusing on the home heat pumps, hot water heat pump, and heat pump clothes dryers is more important than solar arrays.
Yeah, good point.
Solar arrays, strength from the grid.
Yes.
Solar arrays are lovely. We're glad I have had one on my house for 13 years now. It's actually earned its way back. But that's been an economic incentive for me, it didn't really change. The thing that changed my carbon footprint was getting rid of my oil burning furnace and putting in ductless heat pumps. That made a difference. Anything else in CE5?
This is sort of jumping around, but is there a reason CE 8.4 is in 8 and not 5? It seems like supporting developments that use clean energy and reduced energy consumption goes with buildings and energy to me.
Say that again, which one are you trying?
8.4.
It's the discussion of using clean energy or reduced energy consumption. It's specific to transit-oriented development. And perhaps the buildings and energy would be to support that for all, including single-family housing. And not just in transit-oriented developments, so it's not necessarily misplaced in 8.4, but it should be included for the rest of the city too. So it's every other, everything else that's being built outside the transit-oriented development bubbles should also have that kind of encouragement.
Yeah, I guess that was my question,
Yeah.
is like, is there a reason that this is tied to transit development and oriented development instead of just buildings?
5.6 has some of that, but you don't feel like it covers all of it.
It has some of it, but 5.6 is about upgrades and retrofits.
Not new.
Not
Not new.
necessarily encouraging, in the way I read it and interpret it.
And
I am
So maybe.
not a city planner.
Right.
So.
but it is entirely possible that we do see a wave in, it may be 10 or 20 years out, but of tear down and build new.
Oh, yeah.
We're already seeing some of it of
Yep.
tear down and build new. And having something in here to remind people that if they're building single family housing,
So you could just probably just add a few words in there to include.
so
Either adapting 5.6 to not just be about upgrades and retrofits, or having a version of either 8.4 either duplicated in some way, or moving it into 5 instead of 8 so that it's not just about transit-oriented development.
So does that make sense to you folks?
Yeah, curious to hear from Mark.
Duplicating in 5 is the preference, because when I'm sitting with somebody talking about a 6-story project in the Southern Gateway, I need 8.4 to be under
Yes,
8.
you absolutely do.
Why do I have to buy 42 heat pumps? Because of 8.4.
Yeah. And they need to be unique ductless. They each need their own controller. Yep.
So, I'm sorry, what was your recommendations to add it to?
Yeah, and that can be done either by putting in an additional policy or modifying policy CE 5.6 so that it addresses new construction in addition to upgrades. And retrofits. Folks are good on that? Anything else in CE 5? CE 5. CE 5. Moving on to CE 6, alternatives to driving. Okay. Comments? I'll note we had another overburdened communities that lack sustainable transportation options, right, in the very start. And mobility hubs is defined, but overburdened communities is another one of those absolutely wonderful phrases.
But it clarifies it by says that lacks sustainable transportation option, so it gives you more context. Where some of the other ones don't.
Yeah.
What is the definition of an overburden? So one that lacks transportation.
Yeah, so overburdened communities has to be its own. I mean, that's a term that you use and it will have a definition.
Okay.
And even if the definition changes slightly in usage after usage, it should be a defined term somewhere.
So
Or it should be defined every time it's used so that it's absolutely clear what you mean by it.
or do we just mean all communities lack sustainable transportation options, but then you get into that problem, not including the equitable
Let's,
issues.
I'm gonna let them
Yeah,
handle
yeah,
this
yeah.
because they're gonna wrestle these to the ground. I know this. Other questions under goal CE 6? CE 6?
David had a question, which park and ride facilities?
I have the same question. Which park and ride were you talking about? Under 6.2?
Well, it's park and hide facility.
I'm pulling up the policies, Maddie.
Yeah.
If we don't have an answer for you now, we can confirm with Fair and Piers tomorrow.
Mhm.
Great. Oh, you got, Deputy Mayor Furtani had the same question, what is an overburdened community in this context? Okay, well, we're all on the same page. Anything else in goal CE6?
6.3 again to me feels like an action instead of an overarching direction. Feels very specific. It feels more specific than the majority of other things in there.
When I hear that, I hear implementation list.
Yeah.
It's in the climate action plan as a
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah, it's one of our strategies for sure.
Do,
And that's where I'm curious if it's the strategy, is there a zoomed out version that would encompass that and other things that come up over the coming years?
Well, one of the things that we thought was that there ought to be collaboration with our, you know how, the east side cities have the east side city collaborative to do things. We thought there ought to be a north end collaborative, a lot of issues around these, but I'm not sure.
Is there a reason not like Terrace isn't included?
They're they're not King County, but no.
Well, and they're kind of kitty comp, this kind of sounds silly, but we only overlap for about a block and most of that's at power line.
Yeah, yeah,
Right away.
I know, I just didn't, yeah. Didn't want to exclude that.
No, we've been thinking that it's Shoreline, Lake Forest, Park Cloth and Kenmore with them.
Yeah,
That's sort of that, if you could get those cities
As
as
a
a
start.
way the east
then-
side cities are.
And then we can conquer the north. No, that's, where can we build partnerships most easily, and part of that is those artificial lines on map end up having meaning when your funding comes from a county.
totally makes sense.
Anything else in CE6? So we didn't answer the question, is there a, but I'm not sure we can answer that here now either.
But it might be support collaboration among,
And like that could be in there as an example of what collaboration may be, but it seems right now very specific to a single point of collaboration that we're aiming for.
So perhaps rewrite 6.3 to be a more overarching perspective as support collaboration among neighboring cities. Something of that
to promote.
to promote.
To promote, like, I even like the streamlined connected alternative transit options. Including blah, 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 or something like that, like, it's about more than just scooters, it's about alternative transit options that connect multiple communities.
Mhm. Yeah, I was wondering why this is so specific, and it looks like we pulled it from the existing transportation chapter. So that is where that comes from, but we can suggest amending it.
Perfect.
So, shall we just leave that with you then?
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Down and move on.
Moving right along. Goal CE7, electric vehicles, any comments?
What's a just transition? Didn't know what it was.
Oh, it's the labor's happy language.
Well, but we're going to electric vehicle.
It's supposed to be done in a way that, well, I'll stop talking now. Just transition, is that a word that you can put in the glossary, a term you can put in the glossary?
Yep, absolutely.
Well, any other comments to electric vehicles? Section CE7. Section CE7, anything else? Otherwise, moving to section CE8. Section CE8, efficient transit-oriented development. We've already gone through much of this. We've covered much of this. Is there any further comment to CE8? Further comment? Further comment? Moving to CE9 waste management. Comments to CE9?
You do battery recycling?
Yeah, it's right.
Less and less, but yeah, we do.
Yeah.
One type, yeah. And not lithium ion.
Any further? I had a question about policy CE 9.3, the initial verb facilitate the city's 70% recycling rate goal. That did not seem like the right verb.
Mm, mhm.
You have an equally squishy suggestion? No, that's not. That doesn't like do.
Uh,
That's a hard one.
was it encourage
Promote.
well, promote says that we're gonna just publicize it.
You could do support. Facilitate actually feels less squishy than most of the rest of the alternatives to me.
Yeah, I think that-
It, because that to me says like you're actually responsible for making sure that it is happening, not just like y'all should probably do that.
That's a focus, like about focus. Yeah, facilitate. It's squishy enough, it doesn't say meet the or hit the. That's more of an action item, even though that's the intent. But
Yeah, it feels like
Okay.
you don't have to hit it, but you have to make sure it gets hit.
actively, yeah.
So
And clarifying that that comes from the current comp plan as well, the environmental quality chapter.
Then let's stick with it. Let's squeeze it right down on the box. Okay. Okay, moving to volume 2. So quick breather. Ground in. Is everybody okay with what we've done with volume 1?
Mhm.
Okay, then we will dive right into volume 2. And we will start with the introduction. Comments to the introduction. And I think the first comment would be if we can revise the order of presentation for the volume 1 to emphasize greenhouse gases and then resilience. We would want to do we would want to mirror that change in this document.
Mhm.
Obviously, I appreciated the statement. It also provides an opportunity to address environmental justice by ensuring blah blah blah. I really like that sentence. Can't say that. Because it gives clarity to some of the things that we've been talking about.
I've got to admit, when I read that section, I was hoping you could also say something nice about how effective urban planning makes nicer and safer neighborhoods and cities. And when you have a nice, safe, desirable, attractive community, this not only makes it a nice place to live and a place where elders can continue to stay, or transition to suitable housing, but also, a whole lot of our audience is going to be very worried about their own property values. And everything, when I look at cities all over the world, if you look at a city that has like really walkable neighborhoods and great infrastructure and little shops and all the rest of it, those also have very high property values. So it's a beneficial, it's virtuous circle. And I didn't know if there's some way to work in that concept into this introduction or not.
it also feels like a bit of a double-edged sword to call out that increasing property value is great if I am trying to sell my property. Increasing property value is not great if it also means my taxes are going up and I can no longer afford to live here.
Or you want to buy. But if you have more housing options.
I'm just saying in terms
Yeah.
of like calling out
That's fair.
benefits, increasing the
Livability. making it-
livability and
Nicer.
safety and all of that is great.
So we
Increasing
should stick with livability, safety,
Yeah.
and desirability, or the. Say something about the value of livability and safety. The neighborhood. Makes nice places to live. Okay. And not mention housing prices.
Yeah.
We're gonna pull. Tax you out of your homes. Yeah, because we're not. I mean, that's the whole point of this is to improve the community. Without, using the tools we have available to us. And that's a challenge, but I think it's one we're up to. I really do. I think we're already improving the walkability. I think dropping speed limits to 25 miles an hour improved our walkability a lot. Okay, next section then, if there's nothing else on introduction, we'll move to planning context.
You had to promote change to. Paragraph 5, or did I just mentally miss that?
Yeah,
You may talk about it.
Paragraph 5.
I have it. I have it noted, Mark.
Thank you.
A comment from, we received this comment from David to change center
Yeah,
to promote. So we've got that documented. Thanks.
it's more consistent.
Sounds good.
Planning context. Any comments? The review of the Lake Forest Park Climate Action Plan or the Lake Forest Park 100-year Legacy 100-year Vision Plans. Any comments? Okay, moving on. Public participation. Any comments? That is, I think that's me being snarky. A pivotal role. Thank you so much for saying that our committee is playing a pivotal role. However, our role is tightly constrained. Your role is tightly constrained. You're following a contract that is geared to meet the requirements of Commerce Grant. And the Commerce Grant is tightly constrained. So supportive, or it's hard to say that this plan pivoted on us. Although I appreciate the compliment.
Otherwise.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
they- So.
Very kind of you, but thank you. And we've already talked about the community survey, whether you're going to share anything about the response rate or. It'd be nice to at least have something about the response rate in here. Anything else through this numbered section of the engagement? Down through the city council meetings, planning commission meetings and all. Anything else in that section?
Just an understanding that through June 13th, that this is where that will stand.
Yeah.
And then July, August, September, it'll be evolved.
Updated. So this section will be updated before it's finally submitted to Commerce because more will be done.
No,
Before it's submitted to council, not
yes,
others.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
the fiscal year for Commerce is screwing everything up. So this is how it'll read, and then immediately after, it'll evolve.
Okay. Sorry.
Our Commerce grants worded really squishy. It's draft document. Actionable document.
An actionable document.
Yeah.
Perfect, this will be that. Okay, let's move to the section entitled Climate Change in Lake Forest Park. And I see we have at least one comment in there.
You read that far away.
First, we cite stats for the community-wide survey. Speaks concern. Oh, can we say anything about the stats? That about our residents' concerns.
Yeah, I think we could at a high level.
Okay. Any other comments to the climate change in Lake Forest Park discussion? We'll move to community vulnerability.
Is the color telling me something? That we've moved from blue to green, Brent?
Yeah, so
What's it telling me?
sorry, Maddie. Yeah, so technically this climate change is the header, and these two green sections are subheaders within the climate change in Lake Forest Park. But we're mirroring comp plan style.
So if climate change were chapter 2, this would be chapter 2.1.
Correct.
So if I were reading this as a member of the community and you told me that those who live in areas prone to flooding, wildfires, or extreme heat, especially where infrastructure like roads and buildings are outdated, are more vulnerable, I want a map.
Put it on the implementation item, pay for it, hire staff, and adjust your budget for it.
Well, no,
I'll
the
just-
question, we know that there are some areas in Lake Forest Park that are prone to flooding. The entire city is susceptible to extreme heat, but not necessarily prone to extreme heat. And probably wildfires. I mean, for a wildfire to take out Lake Forest Park, which I agree is not impossible, but my goodness. So
Yeah.
susceptible or prone is one of my questions. And if we're making a generality like this and also discussing places where infrastructure like roads and buildings are outdated, if this is supposed to be a general arm waving statement, then having some caveat in front of it, generally speaking, those who live in areas like this,
Yeah.
as opposed to making, because everything else has been pretty specific to Lake Forest Park, which
Yeah, and
implies that this is too.
yes, and maybe I can jump in just to say that we also heard this comment from Deputy Mayor Furutani, and we do have maps in the climate vulnerability assessment, which is currently in Mark's inbox for review. So we'll work to pull some of those
Okay,
maps
great.
in. Good
Yeah,
luck.
and
Good flag.
I don't want to talk about it tonight, but between now and Thursday, is that going to capture Yanni's primary comment that it's not just the 100, 500-year floodplain map? It's that localized ravine, gravity, flow of the stream, and infrastructure type mapping, because we have not ground truth that.
Yeah,
but
we'll follow up with you about that, Mark. I think
Okay.
just to refresh your memory, we did not find an alternative data source, but I believe in the CVA, so we still have the FEMA map as part of the CVA, but we do have some narrative that speaks to that nuance.
Perfect.
Okay. Anything else under community vulnerability?
Can I just give a gentle time check that it is 8:52?
Yep. And we are hopefully closing in on this. Infrastructure vulnerability to climate change. Any comments? Any comments? I think my only comment was under critical facilities, where you say critical facilities include, I would have started with police and fire stations and ended with libraries, but that's You know, although I love my books. In an emergency, I would probably go to the police fire station. First.
It depends on the emergency.
I know.
If I'm looking for a cooling station or something like that, I'm gonna go to the library before I go to the police station.
And yet the only place we have set up is the police station. The library lost power, the police station didn't.
Yeah.
In the last, in the bomb cyclone. But the only
Also-
place you could get a warm place was actually the police station.
I mean, to support this statement, I would say that underserved communities are unlikely to want to go to a police station.
And yet,
As a
the
state,
only
like-
place with power in town center.
I'm thinking more of cooling stations.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to stay cool during a heat wave, I'm gonna go chill in the library for the day. Anyway, I agree that it doesn't seem like the top priority
So,
of critical facilities.
Given the few minutes later we have left, we'll move on from that. Moving into greenhouse gas emissions in Lake Forest Park, the emissions overview, I think everybody called your attention to error reference source not found.
Yeah.
Got it.
We-
Yeah, sorry about that. That was just late afternoon. Tired brain.
So put it in there so that you can see whether or not we read the document this time. The chart here looks
Yes.
great in color.
We'll make sure that's
Black and white.
friendly. Yeah, exactly. Thanks for flagging that, Anne.
No, I appreciate, I always print your documents in black and white because this is how some people will get them,
Mhm.
It's great.
copy. And that's one of my proofings for you. Were there other comments here in the emissions overview section? We'll start with that. Anyone else in emissions overview? I thought that was pretty linear. How about transportation emissions? We've already talked about the VMT studies is in his inbox.
Yep.
I was wondering how I had missed that, so. I haven't got it today. I just assumed I missed an email. Any comments on contributions of state and federal policies? Then we're gonna take a grounding second and say, are there any comments to any part of this document that a person wanted to share that they did not have an opportunity to share yet? Anything that you're thinking about in terms of overarching comments or flow or function? Heck at it. Then calling for additional comments a second time. Calling for additional comments a third time, hearing none. I think we have shared with you all the comments we had on this document. And just want to congratulate you on an excellent, excellent draft.
Thanks so much. And pro level facilitation. Thank you for moving us along.
Well, I'm just seeing Alexandra's smile of somebody who can actually see the end point. I can see this ending someday.
We're almost there.
And I think this is where we pause and see if we've got your soft support to carry this forward to Planning Commission, pending the changes recommended.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
objection? I'm seeing yes, 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 yes. And Yanni, that's yes.
Thumbs up.
We have unanimity, please.
Great.
You have our support for carrying this forward.
Phenomenal.
Thank you very much.
Vote to adjourn. What? Oh.
No, I'm calling for old business. Did we have any action items? From the May meeting? That I'm unaware of that need to be addressed at this time?
you have completed them by reviewing the full draft climate element. And then I think the remaining action items are on the Cascadia team and on city staff. So the project team will be working with the city. We'll submit a draft to them by next Thursday, and then Mark will be submitting that to Commerce on Friday, June 13th. I think that's all that remains. And then an outstanding question for CPAT members to consider what your role is looking forward beyond the CPAT and how you're going to carry this forward to your respective committees. And then tentatively, if you want to meet again during the Planning Commission review period, I think that would be up to you to decide.
Well, with that, we will leave that question on hold because we'll be meeting in our respective committees and we can agree to that by email communication in the future when it's appropriate timing. I would like to take our last 30 seconds to thank every single person here for their commitment to seeing this through, for their attention to detail and their thoughtful comments during this entire time.
I was gonna say, so 5 of us
Yeah.
are presenting on this tomorrow.
Yes.
Can't table it for long.
No.
But if we want to close out the meeting and informally chat between the 5 of us, that would be great.
That's what I would very much like to do. I just want to thank everyone who has helped participate in this. While it would be noble to think that we're pivotal, I think we can at least say we were supportive and that it's been educational for us and hopefully helpful to our consulting team as they developed an excellent document to bring forward for our community. And thank you all with that.
Great.
Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yes, so
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any objection to adjourning? Any objection? Any objection? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
So we need just 5